Chapter 6, A Good Night's Work. Let's try that. There we go. About 4 hours later, Tristan flung himself into one of the bunks to snatch a little sleep. The two children were already snoring. He had made them go to bed before he did because they would have to be up most of the night, and he knew that at their age they couldn't do without sleep. Also, he had tired them out. First, he had given Jill some practice in archery and found that, though not up to Narnian standards, she really was not too bad. Indeed, she had succeeded in shooting a rabbit, not a talking rabbit, of course. There are lots of ordinary kinds in Western Narnia. And it was already skinned, cleaned, and hanging up. He had found that both children knew about this chilly and smelly job, and they had learned that kind of thing on their great journey through the giant lands in the days of Prince Rilian. Then he had tried to teach Eustace how to use his sword and shield. Eustace had learned quite a lot about sword fighting in his earlier adventures, but that had all been with a straight Narnian sword, and he had never handled a curved colmarine scimitar, which made it hard for many of the strokes were quite different, and some of the habits he had learned with the longsword now had to be unlearned again. So Tristan found out that he had a good eye. Tyrion found out he had a good eye and was very quick on his feet. He was surprised at the strength of both children. In fact, they both seemed to be already much stronger and bigger and more grown up than they had been when he first met them a few hours ago. It's one of the effects which Narnian air often has on visitors from our world. All of them agreed that the very first thing they must do was to go back to the stable hill and try to rescue Jewel the unicorn. After that, if they succeeded, they would try to get away eastward and meet the little army which Runwit the centaur would be bringing from Cair Paravel. An experienced warrior and huntsman like Tyrion can always wake up at the time he wants. So he gave himself until 9 o'clock that night and then put all worries out of his head and fell asleep at once. It seemed only a moment later when he woke up, but he knew by the light and the very feel of things that he had timed his sleep exactly. He got up, put on his helmet and turban, and he had slept in his mail shirt. And then he shook the other two until they woke up. They looked, to tell the truth, very gray and dismal as they climbed out of their bunks, and there was a good deal of yawning. Now, said Tyrion, we go due north from here. By good fortune, 'tis a starry night, and it will be much shorter than our journey this morning, for then we went round about, but now we shall go straight. If we are challenged, then do you two hold your peace, and I will do my best to talk, like a cursed, cruel, proud lord of the collarmen. If I draw my sword, then thou, Eustace, must do likewise, and let Jill leap behind us and stand with an arrow on the string. But if I cry, home, then fly for the tower, both of you, and let none try to fight on, not even one stroke after I've given the retreat. Such false valor has spoiled many noble plans in the wars. And now, friends, in the name of Aslan, let's go forward. Out they went into the cold night. All of the great northern stars were burning above the treetops. The North Star of what the world is called, in that world is called the Spearhead, is brighter than our pole star. For the time, they could go straight toward the Spearhead, but presently they came to a dense thicket, so they had to go out of their course to get around it. After that, for they were still overshadowed by branches, it was hard to pick up their bearings. It was Jill who set them right again. She had been an excellent guide in England, and of course she knew her Narnian stars perfectly, having traveled so much to the wild northern lands, and could work out the direction from other stars even when the Spearhead was hidden. As soon as Tyrion saw that she was the best pathfinder of the three of them, he put her in front, and then he was astonished to find how silently and almost invisibly she glided on before them. By the main, he whispered to Eustace, this girl is wondrous, a wondrous wood maid. And if she had dryad blood in her, she could scarce do better. She's so small, and that's what helps, whispered Eustace. But Jill from in front said, shh, less noise. All around them, the wood was very quiet. Indeed, it was far too quiet. On an ordinary Narnian night, there ought to have been no noises, occasional cheery good night from a hedgehog or a cry from an owl overhead, perhaps a flute in the distance to tell of fauns dancing, or some throbbing hammering noises from dwarfs underground. All that was silenced. Gloom and fear reigned over Narnia. After a time, they began to go steeply uphill, and the trees grew further apart. Tyrion could dimly make out a well-known hilltop and the stable. Jill was now going with more and more caution. She kept on making signs to the others with her hands to do the same. Then she stopped dead still, and Tyrion saw her gradually sink down into the grass and disappear without a sound. A moment later, she rose again and put her mouth close to Tyrion's ear and said in the lowest possible whisper, "Get down, thee better." She said thee for see, not because she had a lisp, but because she knew that hissing the letter S is part of a whisper most likely to be overheard. Tyrion at once lay down, and almost as silently as Jill, but not quite, for he was heavier and older. And once they were down, he saw how from that position you could see the edge of the hill sharp against the star-strewn sky. Two black shapes rose against it. One was the stable, and the other, a few feet in front of it, was a Colmarine sentry. He was keeping very ill watch, not walking even standing, but sitting with his spear over his shoulder and his chin on his chest. "Well done," said Tristan to Jill. She had shown him exactly what he needed to know. They got up, and Tyrion now took the lead. Very slowly, hardly daring to breathe, they made their way up the little clump of trees, which was not more than 40 feet away from the sentinel. "Wait till I come again," he whispered to the other two. "If I miscarry, fly." Then he sauntered out boldly in full view of the enemy. The man started when he saw him and was just going to jump to his feet. He was afraid Tyrion might be one of his own officers and that he would get in trouble for sitting down. But before he could get up, Tyrion had dropped on one knee beside him, saying, "Art thou a warrior of the Tisrocks? May he live forever. It cheers my heart to meet thee. Among all of these beasts and devils of Narnians, give me thy hand, friend." Before he well knew what was happening, the Colmarine sentry found his right hand seized in a mighty grip. Next instant, someone was kneeling on his legs, and a dagger was pressed against his neck. "One noise, and thou art dead," said Tyrion in his ear. "Tell me where the unicorn is, and thou shalt live." "Behind the stable, oh, my master," stammered the unfortunate man. "Good. Rise up and lead me to him." As the man got up at the point of the dagger, that point of the dagger never left his neck. It only traveled round, cold and rather ticklish, as Tyrion got behind him and settled at a convenient place under his ear. Trembling, he went around to the back of the stable. Although it was dark, Tyrion could see the white shape of Jewel at once. "Hush," he said. "No, do not neigh. Yes, Jewel, it is I." "How have they tied thee?" "Hobbled by all four legs and tied with a bridle to a ring in the stable wall," came Jewel's voice. "Stand here, sentry, with your back to the wall. So, now, Jewel, set the point of your horn against the Colmarines' breast." "With a good will, sire," said Jewel. "If he moves, Drive him to the heart. Then, in a few seconds, Tyrion cut the ropes. With the remains of them, he bound the sentry hand and foot. Finally, he made him open his mouth, stuffed it full of grass, and tied him up from scalp to chin so he could make no noise. Then he lowered the man into a sitting position and set him against the wall. I have done thee some discourtesy, soldier, said Tyrion, but such was my need. If we meet again, I may happen to do thee a better turn. Now, Jewel, let us go softly. He put his left arm around the beast's neck, and he bent and kissed his nose, and both had a great joy. They went back as quietly as possible to the place they had left the children. It was darker in there under the trees, and he nearly ran into Eustace before he saw him. All's well, whispered Tyrion. A good night's work. Now for home. They turned and had gone a few paces when Eustace said, Where are you, Pole? There was no answer. Is Jill on the other side of you, sire? He asked. What? Said Tyrion. Is she not on the other side of you? It was a terrible moment. They dared not shout, but they whispered her name in the loudest whispers they could manage. There was no reply. Did she go from you while I was away? Said Tyrion. I didn't see her go or hear her go, said Eustace, but she could have gone without me knowing. She can be quiet as a cat. You've seen for yourself. At that moment, a far-off drumbeat was heard. Jewel moved his ears forward. Dwarves, he said. And treacherous dwarves. Enemies as likely as not, said Tyrion. And here comes something on hooves much nearer, said Jewel. The two humans and the unicorn stood dead still. There were now so many different things to worry about, they didn't know what to do. The noise of hoofs came steadily nearer, and then, quite close to them, a voice whispered, Hello? Are you all there? Thank heavens it was Jill's. Where in the devil have you been to? Said Eustace in a furious whisper, for he had been very frightened. In the stable, gasped Jill. But it was the sort of gasp that when you're struggling with suppressed laughter. Oh, growled Eustace, you think it's funny, do you? Well, all I can say is, have you got Jewel, sire? Said Jill. Yes, here he is. What is that beast with you? That's him, said Jill. But let's be off home before anyone wakes up. And again, there come little explosions of laughter. The others obeyed at once, for they had already lingered long enough in that dangerous place, and the dwarf drums seemed to be coming a little nearer. It was only after they had been walking southward for several minutes that Eustace said, Got him? What do you mean? The false Aslan, said Jill. What? Said Tyrion. Where have you been? What have you done? Well, sire, said Jill, as soon as I saw that you'd got the sentry out of the way, I thought, hadn't I better take a look inside the stable and see what's really there? So I crawled along. It was really an easy thing, anyhow, to draw a bolt. Of course, it was pitch black inside and smelled like any other stable. I then struck a light, and would you believe it, there was nothing at all in there but this old donkey with a bundle of lion skins tied to his back. So I drew my knife and told him he'd have to come along with me. As a matter of fact, I needn't have threatened him with a knife at all. He was very fed up with the stable and quite ready to come. Weren't you, Puzzle dear? Great Scott, said Eustace. Well, I'm jiggered. I was jolly angry with you a moment ago, and I still think it was mean of you to sneak off without telling the rest of us. But I must admit, well, I mean to say, well, it was a perfectly gorgeous thing to do. If she was a boy, she'd have to be knighted, wouldn't she, sire? If she was a boy, said Tyrion, she'd be whipped for disobeying orders. And in the dark, no one would see whether he said this with a frown or a smile. Next minute, there was a sound of rasping metal. What are you doing, sire? Asked Jewel sharply. Drawing my sword to smite off the head of the accused ass, said Tyrion in a terrible voice. Stand clear, girl. Oh, don't, please don't, said Jill. Really, you mustn't. It wasn't his fault. It was all the ape. He didn't know any better, and he's very sorry. He's a nice donkey. His name is Puzzle, and I've got my arms around his neck. Jill, said Tyrion, You are the bravest and most wood-wise of any of my subjects, but also the most malpert and disobedient. Well, let the ass live. What have you to say for yourself, ass? Me, sire? Came the donkey's voice. I'm sure I'm very sorry if I've done wrong. The ape and said Aslan wanted me to dress up like that. And I thought he'd know. I'm not clever like him. I only did what I was told. It wasn't any fun for me living in that stable. I don't even know what's been going on outside. He never let me out except for a minute or two at night. Some days, they'd forget to even give me any water, too. Sire, said Jewel, those dwarfs are coming nearer and nearer. Do we want to meet them? Tyrion thought for a moment and then suddenly gave a great laugh out loud. Then he spoke, not this time in a whisper. By the lion, he said, I'm growing slow-witted. Meet them? Certainly we will meet them. We'll meet them at any one now. We have this ass to show them. Let them see the thing they feared and bowed to. We can show the truth of the ape's vile plot, his secrets out. The tide's turned. Tomorrow, we shall hang the ape on the highest tree in Narnia. No more whisperings and skulkings and disguises. Where are those honest dwarfs? We have good news for them. When you have been whispering for hours, the mere sound of anyone talking out loud has a wonderfully stirring effect. The whole party began talking and laughing. Even Puzzle lifted up his head and gave a grand ee-aw, ee-aw. And the thing the ape hadn't allowed him to do for days. Then they set off in the direction of the drumming. It grew steadily louder, and soon they could see torchlights as well. They came out on one of those rough roads, we should hardly call them roads at all in England, which ran through lantern-wise, and there, marching sturdily along, were about 30 dwarves, all of which had their little spades and mattocks over their shoulders. 2 armed Calmarines led the column, and 2 more brought up the rear. Stay, thundered Tyrion as he stepped out on the road. Stay, soldiers. Whither do you lead these Narnian dwarves, and by whose orders? And that is the end of chapter 6.